couple of reasons. One is when the street is complete, Fresno Street in Fulton and Tulare Street in Fulton will be our first two scramble intersections in Fresno. So when the light is red for the traffic, it'll be red in all directions, and pedestrians can go any direction, north, south, east, west, and diagonal all at once. They've got them in New York City and places like that, and they'll be our first two in Fresno, which is pretty neat. Yeah, so all the cars will have to wait, and then pedestrians just go wherever they want.
We did one by Fresno State on Cedar at Fresno State.
What's that?
There's one at San Jose.
Oh, there is. Oh, okay. All right. Well, there goes
one in downtown.
The first one in downtown. All right, there we go.
Fresno State.
Yeah. San Jose and Cedar.
Fresno State doesn't count.
Yeah.
They're on their own. So anyway, Proctor Jewelers is getting that building is getting a facelift, going back to the original brick. That's really exciting. That's a key corner. The cheese grater will come off, and we'll get back to the original look. One of the things we do in the code is to try to encourage historic buildings that were covered up in the 60s with the aluminum and the stucco and the cheese graters to take all that off and get back to the original. And so we try to include some incentives for that. Another thing that we talk about in the code is just how you compose the outside of the building, and you can do it in a traditional or a more modern type of way, but there are certain basic building blocks that all the downtowns have, regardless of what style they use. The Guarantee Building is a good example of that. If you notice, it's broken very clearly into a base. The first couple of stories are designed one way, then you've got the middle or the shaft, and then you've got the top that's set off in a different material and has those sorts of elements. And so we encourage that in the code for new buildings too. And what that does, when you start getting taller buildings, it gives it more of a human scale, and it helps them fit in and really kind of all add up to a really nice feeling place. I've seen that same thing done in a very modern way or in a traditional way, but however you do it, it really helps kind of give that pedestrian scale to buildings that get pretty big. And so a lot of our best buildings, you can see it with Security Bank. The way the top story is set back a little bit, it's a different color. You can see with the Helm building how it's got that cornice line between the upper floors and the middle floors.
And the windows change at the top.
The windows become arched. So there's just always a little something, the ground and the floor and the top floor are special. And so when you express that in the architecture, it just makes those buildings feel a little bit more relatable, and you get attached to them a little bit more. And so things like that are really easy to do and make a big impact, we built that into the code so that as we fill in the empty spaces, it feels like home. If these are buildings that feel like they're contributing to what made downtown great historically, and hopefully we'll continue to add to that as we move forward. Anything else you want to touch here, Craig?
Well, talk about those are sort of old traditional storefronts that have been changed. What does a traditional smaller scale building look like?
Yeah, the facade work that was done in the 50s and 60s was just atrocious. We've got John Roop here who has studied a lot of these buildings, uncovered our oldest commercial building with the Expositor, and has uncovered a lot of what may or may be lurking behind these facades. But in the original early eras of Fresno, and in towns that really get it right today, the way you do buildings like this is not like what you see. For one thing, the security gates. Yeah, you need security if you're not going to be in the building for a while. You want to secure your inventory, but there are ways to put those gates inside of those storefront windows rather than outside that don't make it feel like a hostile place when you're closed. So hey, yeah, you're closed, but now the street doesn't feel like a prison. The worst are the roll down garage door kind of things, right? So there are ways to secure your building, but still make it feel like a nice place. And you've got to go for those win-win situations. But the way the upper part of these buildings, this is a good example. What these buildings probably had originally were what are called clear story windows. So you've got your main windows and maybe an awning or signage, and then above that, windows above that let light in. a lot of those were covered up. I don't know why in the 50s and 60s. And so, we try to get back to that original way of composing a storefront where you've got, two, column type of things flanking the outside, a lot of glazing in the middle, storefront set in with the display windows, signage centered above, and get back to that original way of composing. So we actually have rules now in the new code on how you put together a storefront. It allows you to do it in a variety of ways, but we want those basic elements to come back. Looking at that doesn't beckon for you to come in. And we want these for these businesses to beckon, to pull people in, to make it feel like a place you want to go, not only the business, but the block as a whole. And so another thing that's important too that got kind of ignored is some of these buildings like the Expositor, if you're familiar with what John's uncovered down the block, or the next block with the Expositor. That was a building that had one or two, I think it was just one storefront, and then the upstairs entrance, and there were office spaces above. And so, let's set those off. So you have your main entrance for the upstairs uses, you have your storefront, you design those differently so that people like to know how to read their buildings. People don't like to walk down the street and kind of feel confused. And so when there are ways of expressing, hey, here's the main lobby to the upstairs, here's the entrance into a business, here's another entrance into a business. I'll let the fire truck go by. When you design that right, people see the building and instantly know what's going on. Hey, that's the upstairs lobby, that's the business. That's a civic building, a church, a town hall, or whatever. And you know how to read. We got away from that. We made our towns hard to read, and it's just one of the little things that adds up to make us not like these places anymore. And so getting back to that language of expressing these buildings makes them easier to read. It makes people feel more comfortable, makes people attached. There's a reason why people love these old neighborhoods when they're still intact. And so we want to try to get back to those things. And we're not forcing traditional architecture. If someone wants to come in and do a Mediterranean building, a neoclassical building, that's great. But if they want to do it in a modern way too, we still want that proper downtown way of expressing it, even if you skin it in a more modern way. And so, it needs to be legible and appealing and comfortable and feel like a welcoming place rather than a prison.
Questions? Elliot.
See a mix of ground floor retail and office. Well, how do you make? What do you make of that, and how does the code deal with that?
So in ground floor offices can be great, but on your main street, at the corner of Main and Main, which is what this intersection of Mariposa represent, you really don't want ground floor office space. You want ground floor to be retail, dining, entertainment, really high volume pedestrian activities. So what the code says is right here in this stretch, you've got to have those uses on the ground floor adjacent to the sidewalk. Now the back portion of the ground floor behind the retail shops, hey, put an office back there, knock your socks off. Upstairs, hey, office would be great. This is a perfect place for people to work. But on that front part of the ground floor along the sidewalk, we need those high volume, high turnover, really active, really interesting retail types of uses. But we don't apply that same restriction everywhere. So, out in the Mural District on Stanislaus and Broadway, hey, a storefront office space, that's great. That's not the high volume, high importance part of our main drag. So, what we've done is make sure that where it really counts, we get that active ground floor retail. And then elsewhere, hey, you can do some retail, you can do a ground floor office, you can do a ground floor residential unit with a porch, what have you, that's fine. But here, we've got to have that retail, restaurant, entertainment.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good. All right. Let's walk through the Mariposa plot. Wait.